Professor Zichtal's four iridescent eyes gleamed with barely contained excitement as she floated before her xenobiology class aboard the research vessel Peaceful Inquiry. The observation deck hummed with nervous energy as her students, a carefully selected collection of beings from across the Galactic Federation's most prestigious institutions, had been preparing for this unprecedented field trip for nearly a full standard cycle. Today, my dear students, we embark upon what may be the most important educational experience of your academic careers, she announced, her translator working overtime to convert her native clicks, whistles, and subsonic harmonics into standard galactic. We are about to visit the infamous Sol 3, classified by our xenological databases as a Class 12 hazard world, or, as its improbable inhabitants insist on calling it, Earth. A visible shudder of apprehension rippled through the diverse assembly. Kreeth, a delicate crystalline being whose homeworld of Shard boasted perfectly regulated atmospheric conditions and minimal gravitational stress, resonated with anxiety-induced harmonics. Professor, surely this Deathworld designation must be some form of bureaucratic hyperbole. After all, the Federation Council did approve diplomatic contact with these humans. They cannot be completely barbaric. Professor Zichtal's chitinous mandibles clicked in what her students had learned to recognize as dark amusement. Ah, my dear Kreeth, that assumption is precisely why this expedition is so crucial. These beings didn't merely survive on a world that our best scientists deemed uninhabitable. They flourished beyond all theoretical possibilities. They developed complex societies, advanced technologies, and most remarkably, they're now actively spreading to other worlds, systematically terraforming them to replicate the hostile conditions of their birth planet. Veltar, whose gossamer light species had evolved in the gentle 0.2G environment of Whisper among floating crystal gardens, raised several of her 8 translucent appendages in confusion. But Professor, how could sapient life possibly emerge from such extreme environmental pressures? Every xenobiological model we've studied indicates that intelligence develops only in stable, nurturing ecosystems. Our models, Professor Zichtal replied with growing enthusiasm, were catastrophically incomplete. We theorized that harsh conditions would prevent the emergence of higher consciousness. Instead, we discovered they forge it like metal in a star's core. Through the reinforced transparent steel viewport, Earth gradually dominated their field of vision. The blue and green sphere appeared almost mockingly serene, its white atmospheric disturbances swirling in deceptively gentle spirals. Yet the students had spent months analyzing the terrifying data: gravitational forces that would crush most civilized species, atmospheric composition containing corrosive oxygen, violent weather systems with the energy output of small stars, and constant bombardment by deadly stellar radiation. Professor, Plix whispered, his sensory array trembling, how do we even approach such a world without our ship's hull being torn apart? Professor Zichtal's eyes practically sparkled with anticipation. Very, very carefully, my brave students, and with the hope that these humans are as hospitable as their diplomatic messages suggest. The landing shuttle Academic Curiosity descended through Earth's turbulent atmosphere like a leaf in a hurricane, at least from the perspective of the thoroughly traumatized alien students. Their vessel's advanced stabilization systems screamed protests as they fought against atmospheric conditions that would have been classified as a planetary emergency on any civilized world. What humans casually termed a routine descent felt like barely controlled catastrophe to beings whose species had evolved in the gentle, predictable environments of properly regulated worlds. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood waiting at the designated landing coordinates, her relaxed posture and genuine smile doing absolutely nothing to ease the mounting terror of her visitors. She wore nothing more than a simple cotton shirt and denim pants, no environmental protection suit, no gravity compensation harness, no atmospheric filtration system, no radiation shielding. The assembled alien students stared through their reinforced viewports in a mixture of fascination and existential horror. "Welcome to beautiful Earth," Sarah called out cheerfully as the student expedition emerged from their shuttle, each individual safely encased within their species' respective life support cocoons. Her voice carried easily through the dense atmosphere without technological amplification. "I'm Ambassador Sarah Chen, and I'll be your cultural liaison and survival guide for today's educational experience." Professor Zixtal approached with extreme caution, her sophisticated environmental suit humming and whirring as its multiple systems worked frantically to maintain proper atmospheric pressure, temperature regulation, and chemical filtration. "Ambassador Chen, we are deeply honored by your gracious welcome to your formidable world. However, I feel compelled to express concern. Are you not experiencing distress from the radiation exposure? Our ship's sensors are detecting what we would classify as dangerously elevated levels of unfiltered stellar radiation." Sarah glanced casually upward at the blazing nuclear furnace hanging in the sky and gave a dismissive shrug. "Oh, this old thing? It's actually pretty mild today. We'd call this weather partly cloudy. You should experience what we get during a really bright summer day. Now that's when you feel the heat." She grinned with obvious enjoyment. "Don't worry about me, though. I put on SPF 30 sunscreen this morning." The students exchanged glances of pure horror through their protective visors. Veltar's delicate translator unit actually sparked briefly as it struggled to process the concept. "Son? You have developed some form of advanced technological defense system to shield against stellar radiation bombardment?" "Well, it's more like a protective lotion that—" Sarah paused, observing their expressions of mounting panic. "You know what? Let's start with something a bit simpler to process. Would you like to tour our local educational facility? We have some human children who are absolutely thrilled to meet visitors from other worlds." Plix's entire sensory array nearly shut down from shock. "You deliberately expose your developing offspring to this hostile environment? Where else would they go to school?" Sarah asked, appearing genuinely puzzled by the question. "This is where we live." As they began walking toward the institutional building, a small human child suddenly burst into view, running at full speed while pursuing what could only be described as a domesticated apex predator, a creature with dense fur, powerful muscles, and a mouth full of obviously sharp teeth. The alien students watched in paralyzed horror as the child fearlessly tackled the beast, both tumbling to the ground in what appeared to be mortal combat. "Emergency intervention required." Kreeth's crystalline structure rang like an alarm bell. "The human youngling is under attack by a carnivorous predator." Sarah glanced over and burst into delighted laughter. "Oh, that's just Emma, playing with Rex, her German shepherd. They're absolutely wonderful with children, completely devoted and protective." "You intentionally breed apex predators specifically to interact with your vulnerable offspring?" Professor Zixtal's voice climbed several octaves into what might have been hysteria. "Dogs aren't predators anymore," Sarah explained with infinite patience. "Well, not for about 15,000 years anyway. We domesticated them way back in our prehistoric period. Now they're our companions, partners, and beloved family members." The students observed in stunned, speechless amazement as the child and the dog continued their play, the creature's obviously powerful jaws never once threatening the seemingly fragile human. "By the infinite void," Veltar whispered in religious awe. "They've somehow transformed apex predators into protective guardians?" Sarah's smile grew even wider. "Just wait until you meet our horses." The alien students believed they had mentally prepared themselves for any conceivable horror after witnessing humans casually coexisting with domesticated apex predators. They were catastrophically, spectacularly wrong. Sarah led them through reinforced double doors into what she described with disturbing cheerfulness as the gymnasium, a cavernous space that could only be described as a carefully organized torture chamber. The vast room contained the most terrifying collection of mechanical devices designed for systematic physical torment that the students had ever encountered in their collective academic careers. What made the scene infinitely more horrifying was the sight of young humans voluntarily, even enthusiastically, subjecting themselves to these instruments of deliberate suffering. This is where our children engage in what we call physical education, Sarah explained with obvious pride as they observed a group of adolescent humans running in precise circles around the perimeter of the room at velocities that would have been considered emergency evacuation speeds on most civilized worlds. Their feet struck the ground with rhythmic impacts that registered on seismic sensors. They appear to be fleeing from some imminent threat? Pleeks inquired anxiously, his entire sensor array frantically scanning the environment for whatever predator or natural disaster had triggered this obvious panic response. "Oh no, they're just warming up their cardiovascular systems," Sarah replied with the casual tone one might use to discuss weather patterns. "Coach Martinez always insists they complete several laps before beginning the actual exercise regimen." Professor Zeichtal's environmental suit began emitting increasingly distressed warning signals as her stress monitoring systems registered levels that approached critical thresholds. The actual exercise regimen? That's precisely when the humans transitioned to what could only be described as ritualized self-torture. The alien students watched in mute, paralyzed horror as creatures who should have been crushed flat by their own planet's oppressive gravitational field casually hoisted masses of metal that would have required heavy industrial equipment to move on their homeworlds. They lifted these impossible weights repeatedly, voluntarily, with expressions of intense concentration rather than agony. "This young man is bench pressing 200 pounds, Sarah noted with obvious maternal pride, indicating a human specimen who appeared to be barely past juvenile development. "Pretty impressive for a sophomore. He's been working consistently toward this goal." Creeth's crystalline molecular structure actually developed visible fracture lines from the shock. 200 pounds? That represents approximately 91 kilograms of mass. How is his skeletal system not collapsing under the compression forces? "Jake's been consistently strength training since he turned 12, Sarah explained as if this were perfectly reasonable. "His ultimate goal is to bench press his own body weight by graduation ceremony." Veltar's delicate appendages trembled with existential terror. "It's attempting to lift itself?" Before Sarah could elaborate on this apparent impossibility, a piercing whistle echoed through the space with the intensity of an emergency alert. The humans immediately ceased their various self-inflicted torments and gathered around a larger human specimen carrying what appeared to be a spherical projectile weapon. "All right, people," Coach Martinez's voice boomed across the gymnasium with military precision. "Time for dodgeball. Choose your teams." What followed transcended every definition of civilization the students possessed. The humans systematically divided into opposing factions and began hurling the spherical weapons at each other with velocities that would have been classified as assault weaponry on most worlds. When struck by these projectiles, instead of seeking immediate medical intervention, they laughed with genuine amusement and joined the opposing team. They're weaponizing recreational activities?" Professor Zeichtal whispered in a mixture of awe and existential terror. "And they appear to derive pleasure from being injured," Veltar added. Observing as a human who had been struck directly in the facial region immediately smiled and continued participating. Sarah noticed their obvious distress. "Oh, don't worry about dodgeball. It's considered pretty tame. You should see what they do during wrestling season." "Wrestling?" Creeth's harmonic resonance cracked with fear. "Organized combat sports," Sarah explained helpfully. "They attempt to physically overpower each other for entertainment and character development. Extremely popular. We also have boxing, where they systematically strike each other in the head until one participant loses consciousness." The alien students had naively assumed they had witnessed the absolute pinnacle of Earth's incomprehensible dangers until Sarah casually mentioned the need to monitor atmospheric conditions with the same tone one might use to discuss trivial scheduling matters. "Looks like we might be experiencing a thunderstorm system this afternoon," she remarked while glancing at a small handheld communication device, her expression displaying mild interest rather than the existential terror such an announcement should have provoked. "We should probably relocate the outdoor educational activities to interior spaces for safety protocols." Professor Zixtal's inandibles began clicking in an increasingly rapid staccato pattern of anxiety. "Thunderstorm? Are you referring to electrical discharge events originating from atmospheric disturbances?" "Exactly right," Sarah confirmed with cheerful nonchalance. "Nothing particularly serious today. The forecast indicates moderate lightning activity, heavy precipitation, and winds around 60 kilometers per hour. Pretty standard for this seasonal period." The alien students stared at her in collective horror that bordered on catatonic shock. On their respective homeworlds, atmospheric electrical discharges were catastrophic events that triggered planetary emergency evacuation protocols and required immediate shelter in reinforced underground facilities. Here, humans discussed them as minor scheduling inconveniences comparable to transportation delays. "You continue normal daily activities while your planet's atmosphere is literally launching electrical attacks against surface dwellers?" Veltar asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Well, we're not completely reckless about it," Sarah replied, with a tone suggesting she found their concern somewhat amusing. "We implement basic safety measures, remain indoors during active electrical activity, avoid elevated terrain and metallic objects, postpone recreational activities in open areas. Standard precautionary protocols." "Recreational activities?" Kreith chimed with growing hysteria. "Golf, for instance," Sarah explained helpfully. "It's a popular sport where participants use metallic implements to strike small spherical objects across vast open landscapes. Absolutely wonderful exercise and quite relaxing, but definitely inadvisable during lightning storms." The students struggled to process this information through their overwhelmed cognitive systems. Humans had deliberately invented recreational activities that involved wielding metallic conductors in exposed areas on a planet where the atmosphere regularly attempted to electrocute surface inhabitants. That's when the atmospheric warfare began in earnest. What Sarah had dismissed as moderate winds would have been classified as a catastrophic atmospheric disaster requiring immediate emergency response on any civilized world. Ancient trees bent at physically impossible angles as if constructed from flexible materials, miscellaneous debris transformed into high-velocity projectiles, and the auditory assault resembled the collective screaming of 1,000 tormented souls experiencing simultaneous agony. The human students, meanwhile, pressed their faces against reinforced transparent steel windows with expressions of genuine excitement and wonder. "Incredible! Observe the aerodynamic stress patterns on that oak tree," one shouted with obvious delight. "I sincerely hope we don't experience power grid failure," another commented with practical concern. "I have a critical academic examination scheduled for tomorrow morning." "You've psychologically adapted to prioritize educational assessments over surviving atmospheric warfare?" Professor Zixtal asked in complete amazement. "Academic examinations are significantly more terrifying than weather systems," the student replied with absolute seriousness. "Storms are just temporary atmospheric phenomena. Test scores determine your entire future trajectory." As if the universe wished to emphasize this point with dramatic flair, a massive lightning bolt struck a nearby location, illuminating the entire educational facility with brilliant white radiance. The thunder that followed created seismic vibrations that registered on geological monitoring equipment. The human students barely acknowledged the event. "Spectacular electrical display!" a student exclaimed with appreciation. "Did anyone observe that branching discharge pattern?" Your developing offspring find atmospheric violence aesthetically appealing? Veltar inquired with mounting psychological trauma. Lightning is genuinely beautiful, Sarah admitted with obvious appreciation. As long as you maintain proper respect for its destructive potential, it's absolutely magnificent to observe. Of course, you should experience our tornado season for truly impressive atmospheric dynamics. The alien students had naively assumed they had witnessed the absolute pinnacle of Earth's incomprehensible dangers until Sarah casually mentioned the need to monitor atmospheric conditions with the same tone one might use to discuss trivial scheduling matters. "Looks like we might be experiencing a thunderstorm system this afternoon," she remarked while glancing at a small handheld communication device, her expression displaying mild interest rather than the existential terror such an announcement should have provoked. "We should probably relocate the outdoor educational activities to interior spaces for safety protocols." Professor Zixtal's mandibles began clicking in an increasingly rapid staccato pattern of anxiety. "Thunderstorm? Are you referring to electrical discharge events originating from atmospheric disturbances?" "Exactly right," Sarah confirmed with cheerful nonchalance. "Nothing particularly serious today. The forecast indicates moderate lightning activity, heavy precipitation, and winds around 60 kilometers per hour. Pretty standard for this seasonal period." The alien students stared at her in collective horror that bordered on catatonic shock. On their respective homeworlds, atmospheric electrical discharges were catastrophic events that triggered planetary emergency evacuation protocols and required immediate shelter in reinforced underground facilities. Here, humans discussed them as minor scheduling inconveniences, comparable to transportation delays. "You continue normal daily activities while your planet's atmosphere is literally launching electrical attacks against surface dwellers?" Veltar asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Well, we're not completely reckless about it," Sarah replied with a tone suggesting she found their concern somewhat amusing. "We implement basic safety measures, remain indoors during active electrical activity, avoid elevated terrain and metallic objects, postpone recreational activities in open areas, standard precautionary protocols." "Recreational activities?" Kreith chimed with growing hysteria. "Golf, for instance," Sarah explained helpfully. "It's a popular sport where participants use metallic implements to strike small spherical objects across vast open landscapes. Absolutely wonderful exercise and quite relaxing, but definitely inadvisable during lightning storms." The students struggled to process this information through their overwhelmed cognitive systems. Humans had deliberately invented recreational activities that involved wielding metallic conductors in exposed areas on a planet where the atmosphere regularly attempted to electrocute surface inhabitants. That's when the atmospheric warfare began in earnest. What Sarah had dismissed as moderate winds would have been classified as a catastrophic atmospheric disaster requiring immediate emergency response on any civilized world. Ancient trees bent at physically impossible angles as if constructed from flexible materials. Miscellaneous debris transformed into high-velocity projectiles, and the auditory assault resembled the collective screaming of 1,000 tormented souls experiencing simultaneous agony. The human students, meanwhile, pressed their faces against reinforced transparent steel windows with expressions of genuine excitement and wonder. "Incredible! Observe the aerodynamic stress patterns on that oak tree," one shouted with obvious delight. "I sincerely hope we don't experience power grid failure," another commented with practical concern. "I have a critical academic examination scheduled for tomorrow morning." "You've psychologically adapted to prioritize educational assessments over surviving atmospheric warfare?" Professor Zixtal asked in complete amazement. Academic examinations are significantly more terrifying than weather systems, the student replied with absolute seriousness. Storms are just temporary atmospheric phenomena. Test scores determine your entire future trajectory. As if the universe wished to emphasize this point with dramatic flair, a massive lightning bolt struck a nearby location, illuminating the entire educational facility with brilliant white radiance. The thunder that followed created seismic vibrations that registered on geological monitoring equipment. The human students barely acknowledged the event. "Spectacular electrical display!" a student exclaimed with appreciation. "Did anyone observe that branching discharge pattern?" "Your developing offspring find atmospheric violence aesthetically appealing?" Veltar inquired with mounting psychological trauma. "Lightning is genuinely beautiful," Sarah admitted with obvious appreciation. "As long as you maintain proper respect for its destructive potential, it's absolutely magnificent to observe. Of course, you should experience our tornado season for truly impressive atmospheric dynamics." Professor Zixtal had specifically requested an academic conference with the human biology instructor, Dr. Rodriguez, desperately hoping to understand the fundamental mechanisms by which Earth's life forms had developed such impossible resilience and adaptability. She was completely unprepared for the existential horror she was about to discover. "So, you're interested in understanding human biological systems?" Dr. Rodriguez asked with obvious enthusiasm, guiding the traumatized group into her meticulously organized classroom filled with preserved specimens that would have been classified as biological weapons on most civilized worlds. "Where would you prefer to begin our educational discussion?" "Perhaps," Professor Zixtal suggested with careful diplomatic precision, "you could explain the evolutionary processes by which your species developed such extraordinary physical capabilities and stress resistance." "Oh, we're really not that remarkable," Dr. Rodriguez replied with characteristic human modesty that the students were beginning to recognize as a warning sign of impending horror. "We're actually pretty average specimens for Earth mammals. Now, if you want to observe something genuinely impressive, let me introduce you to tardigrades." She activated a holographic projection system displaying a microscopic creature that appeared to have been designed by a committee of evolutionary nightmares with access to unlimited creative malice. "These magnificent little organisms are essentially indestructible by any reasonable standard," Dr. Rodriguez explained with the enthusiasm typically reserved for discussing beloved family members. "They can survive temperature ranges from near absolute zero to 150 degrees Celsius, pressure levels 6 times greater than our deepest ocean trenches, and radiation intensities thousands of times stronger than lethal doses for most complex organisms. Oh, and they can survive indefinitely in the complete vacuum of space without any life support systems." The alien students stared at the holographic image with expressions of pure existential terror. This nightmare creature actually exists on your world?" Veltar whispered with religious dread. "Everywhere," Dr. Rodriguez confirmed with obvious pride. "They inhabit your garden soil, ocean sediments, Arctic ice formations, tropical rainforests, probably this classroom right now. Completely harmless to larger organisms, though, they primarily consume other microscopic life forms and organic detritus." Creeth's crystalline molecular structure began resonating at frequencies that indicated imminent structural failure. "You peacefully coexist with creatures that are functionally immortal?" "Well, they're not technically immortal," Dr. Rodriguez clarified with scientific precision. "They enter a cryptobiotic state called anhydrobiosis when environmental conditions become unfavorable. They can remain in suspended animation for decades, potentially centuries, then resume normal biological functions when conditions improve." Professor Zixtal was frantically recording observations with trembling appendages. "What other life forms demonstrate these impossible survival characteristics?" "Oh, countless species, really. Cockroaches can survive radiation levels that would be instantly fatal to humans. Certain bacterial species actually thrive in boiling water or concentrated acid solutions. There's a particular jellyfish species, Turritopsis dohrnii, that's achieved biological immortality through cellular age reversal. You have immortal jellyfish creatures? They can theoretically reverse their aging process and restart their life cycle indefinitely. Fascinating biological mechanism. And then we have extremophiles, organisms specifically adapted to survive in conditions that violate basic assumptions about life sustainability. We've discovered thriving ecosystems in Antarctic ice formations, deep ocean thermal vents reaching temperatures that should denature proteins, inside solid rock kilometers underground, and even in highly radioactive environments that would sterilize most known life forms. The students were beginning to comprehend that humans weren't the most dangerous entities on Earth. They were simply the most successful survivors in a planetary ecosystem populated entirely by impossible life forms. But surely humans represent unique intelligence development in your biosphere? Professor Zixtal asked with desperate hope. Well, we certainly like to believe so, Dr. Rodriguez said with obvious affection, but we're definitely not the only cognitively advanced species on Earth. Dolphins have developed complex linguistic systems and cultural traditions. Elephants demonstrate remarkable memory capabilities and engage in mourning rituals. Octopuses are incredible problem-solving specialists, and several bird species can manufacture tools and demonstrate planning for future events. As the educational expedition concluded, the alien students gathered within their protective shuttle, environmental suits humming desperately to shield them from Earth's mild atmosphere. Professor Zixtal called for their final observations, her voice carrying undertones of profound transformation. So, she began, after this unprecedented study, what insights have we gained about why Earth bears the designation of a death world? Kreith's crystalline structure resonated thoughtfully. It's not that the world is trying to kill everything. Everything is simultaneously trying to eliminate everything else. And through millennia of this process, they've all become extraordinarily proficient at survival. The humans haven't conquered their environment, Veltar added with growing comprehension. They've joined it. They've become integral participants in the constant evolutionary struggle. Plix nodded vigorously. They don't perceive danger as something to be eliminated or feared. They perceive it as something to be embraced, celebrated. My translation matrix might be malfunctioning. Professor Zixtal clicked approvingly. Excellent observations, but you're missing the most crucial realization. She gestured toward the school through their viewport, where human children continued playing despite atmospheric electrical activity, gravitational stress, radiation exposure, and countless hazards that forced their life support systems to maximum capacity. Observe them carefully, she instructed. They're not merely surviving on a death world through grim determination. They're thriving with genuine joy. They're demonstrably happy. The students watched as human children laughed and played under conditions requiring emergency evacuation on their worlds. But how? Veltar asked with bewilderment. How do they maintain such joy while facing constant mortal peril? Because, Professor Zixtal said slowly, they don't experience it as mortal peril. They experience it as home. Ambassador Chen approached their shuttle for farewell, still wearing simple clothing, breathing unfiltered atmosphere, radiating contentment despite existing in conditions registering as life-threatening on every alien monitoring system. I hope you found your visit educational, she said warmly. You're welcome back any time. Ambassador Chen, Professor Zixtal asked, when the Federation first contacted your species, weren't you concerned about space travel dangers, the radiation, vacuum, hostile environments? Sarah laughed. Dangerous? Have you seen what we deal with daily? Space is peaceful compared to Earth. No weather, no predators, no biological hazards. It's actually relaxing. The students exchanged glances. What humans considered relaxing was the cold vacuum of space. Besides, Sarah continued, we've been preparing for space exploration our entire evolutionary history. Every day on Earth is survival training for harsher environments. As their shuttle lifted off, Professor Zixtal compiled her final report. Earth is designated a death world not because it's unsuitable for life, but because it's so suitable that everything evolved to be incredibly dangerous. Humans aren't an exception, they're the perfect example. Kreith chimed thoughtfully. Professor, could other species adapt to Earth? Professor Zixtal considered carefully. Perhaps with sufficient time and evolutionary pressure. But it would require thousands of generations to develop humans' casual relationship with danger. Or, Veltar suggested quietly, we could ask them to teach us. The professor's eyes widened. You mean? They've already proven they can help other species adapt to challenging environments. They're domesticated animals, crops, symbiotic relationships. They don't just survive, they help others thrive. Plix nodded enthusiastically. Perhaps that's why they're spreading throughout the galaxy, not to conquer, but to help worlds become more alive. As Earth shrank behind them, the students realized they had discovered something more significant than Deathworld classification reasons. They had encountered the galaxy's greatest hope for expanding life to previously uninhabitable environments. Humans hadn't just survived on a death world, they had transformed it into a thriving garden. Now they were eager to share their gardening techniques with the universe. Professor Zixtal smiled while filing her report. The Federation's attitude toward humans was about to change dramatically. When colonizing challenging environments, who better to consult than the species that had transformed the ultimate challenge into paradise? The humans, she suspected, were just getting started.